Alright, come on. I'm ready to go home.
Mafia 3 is a bit of an interesting one because Mafia 2 is one of my favorite games ever, and the remaster of Mafia 1 became a sort of comfort game of mine in late 2020, but I have never played this one. Sure, I was deterred by the abundance of bugs, the performance issues at launch, and the discussion of repetitive gameplay, but I also remember being at my first job scooping up pecans, listening to Twitch streamers play Mafia 3 while my iPhone 6 was burning a hole in my pocket. The hype was there for me, but I didn't do anything with it until now. So, were we too harsh on Mafia 3? Let's find out. So Mafia 3 released in October of 2017 and has a 62 on Metacritic and a 27% recommended on OpenCritic. Ouch. Looking through various places around the internet, the consensus is that the performances, story, and setting are all great, but the gameplay fails them all, and I unfortunately agree. Mostly. Starting with the highlights, the narrative and setting shine brightest here in Mafia 3. The game immerses players in the 1960s within the fictional city of New Bordeaux, heavily inspired by New Orleans. Given the time and place, it's apparent that racism was widespread and is a major thematic element you will experience because you play as Lincoln Clay, and he is an interesting character. Lincoln was an orphan who was raised by Father James until the orphanage closed down. At that point, he was kind of adopted by Sammy, the leader of the black mob. When Lincoln was old enough, he went to fight in Vietnam, eventually working closely with the CIA. Lincoln returned home to say goodbye to his family before setting off to create a new life, but bang bang bang, people get shot and Lincoln is then off on a mission of revenge. That is a pretty cool setup, and I was sold from the beginning. Luckily, the story evolves in interesting ways, and I loved how it was framed in the style of a documentary. In fact, the story was the only reason I played as much as I did. Because the gameplay doesn't necessarily suck, but it is shallow and repetitive. Lincoln being in the Special Forces during Vietnam explains his insane combat ability, and it can be fun during the first few rackets you clear out. It just quickly loses its appeal. I just mentioned a racket, so let me explain that. The world of Mafia 3 is split into different districts or rackets that you have to take over. You do this by causing chaos, interrogating informants, and then eventually killing the racket leader. You do this like 18 times over the course of the game, and they don't do enough to keep it interesting. It's the same cycle every time, and I get it from a narrative perspective. You cause this chaos to weaken and draw out the district's leader. This system, as designed, has a huge flaw that I'll talk more about soon, but the district leader assassination missions themselves are pretty cool. One takes place in an abandoned flooded amusement park, and another takes place on a high society gambling paddle boat. These missions are great and have stuck with me. I just wish the rest of the game had that same amount of love and detail put into it. Which leads into that flaw I just mentioned. The other Mafia games are still open world, but with what I like to say, different intent behind them. You could still go wherever, find collectibles, and get into GTA-like shootouts, but that is not what it was really designed for. Mafia 2 is my favorite, so I'll use that. You were almost always mission to mission. In many cases during the mission travel time, you had someone with you, and those conversations built on the world and the relationships between characters, and really just made you care. But the world itself was always a backdrop, a tool used for you to be more immersed in the story that was being told. Mafia 3 changes it up and puts a lot more focus on the open world gameplay, which, don't get me wrong, I love the setting, but it throws off the formula. There is just so much travel time where you are alone in Mafia 3. There is the occasional conversation, but it doesn't happen nearly as often as I would like, so you just find yourself listening to the in-game radio stations. Okay, I don't want to understate the radio stations because Mafia 3 has an amazing licensed soundtrack, like one of the best in gaming. But driving through the bayou jamming out to Johnny Cash doesn't help me care about the world or the characters. In the quest to make the open world more involved, they even added their own Ubisoft towers. I mean, it was 2017, and they aren't exactly towers, but these junction boxes are bad enough. You find a box, do this awful lockpicking minigame, pop this bad boy open, and voila, you can now see more dots on your map. How exciting. But hold on, what was that -3 at the bottom there? Ah, right, this takes resources because, of course, you have to be looking out for these little green dots that mark electronic parts, and each junction box requires 3 of them. This isn't exactly riveting gameplay here. If they are forcing you to interact with the open world more, then they surely upped the police interactions, right? No. In fact, they're worse than Mafia 2. In that game, you had to watch your speed limit and make sure you didn't perform any traffic violations near a cop, because they would then try to pull you over. You could pay a fine, run, or take the violent route, but you at least had options. In Mafia 3, they love to let you know that the police are in with the big bad guys, and with the societal climate, you think they would be involved a lot more. But many of the interactions I had were in scripted missions. I could be driving 100 miles per hour on the wrong side of the road and blow through a red light and narrowly miss a cop car, but they don't react. All the game gives me is a little blue warning that a cop is nearby. But that is almost always useless because they won't do anything anyways. Instead of them being a tool to help express the current state of the world you are in, they are just GTA-ified in the worst possible way. And that isn't what Mafia is. Mafia is a game about narrative and character development and being engrossed in a world. Mafia 3 does a lot of that pretty well. I stayed interested in the story, and the performances and cutscenes are some of the best of its time, and there are some genuinely amazing set-piece missions. All of the good parts of Mafia 3 come together and build up something genuinely great, but the lackluster open-world gameplay causes everything to come crashing down. So, were we too harsh on Mafia 3? No, it deserves all of the criticism it has received. Am I glad I finally played it? I should have just played Mafia 2 again. Thanks for watching. Next video is going to be on like college football or something. I don't know. I'm excited for it. See you then.